Hello and welcome to what I think is the first video interview for Mar Shiprim, the newsletter published by the International Association for Assyriology, or the IAA for short. My name is Pavla Rosenstein. I'm a PhD candidate in Assyriology at Yale and the Mar Shiprim editor. And I'm joined today by two very special guests, Eric Cline, Professor of Classics and Anthropology at the George Washington University. Hello, Eric.
Hi.
And Glynnis Fawkes, an illustrator and an instructor at the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont. Hello, Glynnis.
Hi.
Nice to have you both here. And Eric and Glynnis are going to talk to Mar Shiprim readers, fellow Assyriologists, scholars, archaeologists, to share with us the process of collaborating on a graphic novel version of 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed, and also offers some advice for other scholars or illustrators in terms of collaborating on public scholarship projects similar to this one. So thank you both for joining us.
Well, thank you for having us.
As a start, would you like to say a little bit more about each of your backgrounds and how you came to the point of working on the graphic novel together?
Sure, we could do that. And actually, I could give Glynnis's background and she can give my background, which would be an interesting take on it. No, Glynnis, why don't you go first?
All right. Well, my background is mostly in art, as in I studied painting and my MFA is there. And then I had a Fulbright to Cyprus, which caused me to enter into a world of archaeological excavations. So I worked on a lot of different digs and projects around the Eastern Mediterranean, which gave me a sense of the process of archaeology and drawing artifacts for excavations. And I went on from there to publish a book of cartoons about Cypriot archaeology, but then the last about 18 years, I've lived in Vermont and got connected to the Center for Cartoon Studies and began making comics. And so in this book, these two worlds have collided.
Great. And I active field archaeologist, excavating, but also ancient historian. My specialty basically is Bronze Age and now Iron Age in the Mediterranean and ancient Near East. I actually got my master's in your department at Yale. I was actually in the PhD program that I transferred down to Penn, and have, I don't know, written a number of books, including the original version of 1177 BC, which came out in 2014. And then a revised version with all kinds of new data that came out in 2021. And then very recently, April of this year, 2024, the sequel after 1177 came out on the same day that the graphic version of the original came out. They both dropped on April 16th. So that was a very exciting day. So basically, this reflects what I've been studying since the early 80s, I would say. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow. So this project is really a culmination of decades of work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. I wanted to do something on the Bronze Age. And so when Rob Tempio at Princeton asked me if I would write a book on the collapse of the Bronze Age, I said I would do it if I could also talk about the civilizations of the Bronze Age that collapsed, because I really wanted to write a book on the Bronze Age and, bringing in the collapse. Okay, fine. But let's talk about what collapsed, near and dear to my heart, Mycenaeans, Minoans, Assyrians, Babylonians, Hittites, and all of that. So that's where this is originally coming from.
A lot of interdisciplinary connections, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And how did the idea for a graphic novel come together? Who did that come from, and how did you guys connect to work on it together?
It also came from Rob Tempio, Eric's editor. And I had also met him at one of the Classics and Archaeology conferences, the AIA SCS, and had done other work in ancient comics and gave them to Rob alongside the. We had met him together with my husband, John Franklin, and who was also pitching a book, which was published elsewhere ultimately. But I illustrated Eric's book, Three Stones Make a Wall, that arose out of that connection with Rob and another book. And then he said, why don't you think about a graphic version of 1177?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. I remember that we were at a kind of a cocktail party function at the AIA meetings, and we were all standing there, and Rob indeed did say that. But we did get our start with Glynnis illustrating Three Stones Make a Wall, which was my general book on archaeology. And she did, let's see, one big illustration in each of the chapters, but also a smaller one as part of the chapter heading for each of them. So it was quite a bit of work, but they're absolutely gorgeous. And I actually have a couple framed. And so when Rob said, why don't we do a graphic version of 1177, I'm like, brilliant, and let's go for it. And that's where Glynnis was the obvious person to do it, because she's not only a cartoonist, but is also an archaeologist. So she understood, right away what it was we were doing and how to go about doing it. Though we did get to play around with it a bit, as we can explain at some point.
Right. So the idea actually came from the publisher, but there was a precedent and a successful reference point that you could draw on. And you were both very keen to do it. You weren't daunted by the task at all at the time.
What? I was totally daunted.
Yes, I think totally daunted is the way. I mean, Rob has been suggesting books, and I trust him implicitly at this point, because the original book, 1177, was not my idea to write it. They had, kind of approached me. I had pitched a slightly different book, and we managed to merge it. So then when he suggested the graphic version, I said yes. When he suggested the sequel, which is Iron Age, I said yes, though that was very daunting, because Bronze Age, okay, fine, no problem. Iron Age, I had to go back and see what had been done in the last 30 years. So it's all Rob's fault. We're gonna just blame it all on Rob. If it works, great, and if it's not, it's his fault.
Okay, that's the job. And of course, that's a big translation process from a written book to a graphic novel. Can you talk a little bit more about what were some of the challenges, and also was there an adaptation of thinking in terms of different audiences? Is the intended audience for the graphic novel sort of an expansion of the audience for the book, or is it a completely different audience? What was your thinking behind that?
I've thought of it as, like young people are the biggest readers of comics, and so the two characters that are leading you through the story are kind of teenagers, and so I think of that age as middle teenagers and up as the main audience. Up as in college kids, as in anybody older than everybody. And it is listed now as also in the YA category. And so I really want it to be accessible to this age. But at the same time, I have not left out any, I've tried to include as one-to-one of the facts and information that are in the original 1177. And the biggest job of adaptation was cutting words. Like, I know I've said this before, but I think this book is 250-ish pages, and Eric's original is that also. And so that means it's got to have like 80% fewer words to tell the story with pictures. And so it doesn't mean, as Eric, I know you're going to say that your words are irrelevant. It's just that I think one of the reasons why the first 1177 is so readable is that you really situate people in time and place with text. And so I tried to do the same thing with maps and with, I don't know, like here's an image of the Lion Gate, or like another map of where you are in the Mediterranean, or these famous artifacts that go along with this story, to be able to put you there using images rather than text. And so that was my constant job, is interrogating the text and underlining directly, this section can translate to this image. I felt like that was the entire project of this book. How again and again can I make this an image instead?
And so
it could go like three ways, like a map, an artifact, or like a little dramatization scene where it's like, okay, let's put this into somebody's house, and what's their reaction to seeing the sea peoples walking by, or the angry queen, or what the conversation would be like on the deck of the Uluburun wreck before it goes down. Like, and that was my absolute favorite thing, to sort of dramatize these moments in history. And of course, I'm not saying this is what happened, but this is what could have happened, or here's a funny version of what might have happened.
Yeah. So we were collaborating on this weekly. I mean, Glynnis would send me a draft, and then I would comment on it, and then she'd redo the drafts, and it's me again. And, most of it, I would say, that's great, that's wonderful, that's really funny, excellent job, this is good. Other times I would say, wait, I think page 18 should actually be page 12, and, and flip telling the story, something like that. So it was very much a collaboration, but in terms of Glynnis taking the lead, and I was almost, I would say I was the consultant, let's put it that way, with giving feedback at every time. But I think it definitely worked. The YA that Glynnis referred to stands for young adults, and we were thinking that that was the market, like age 7 to 17, which I think indeed it is. I'm getting feedback from people who say they've bought it for their kids or their grandkids or their younger sibling, and that the kids love it. I just heard from somebody who was in Europe, who came here, and the 3 kids, their book for traveling on the airplane was this book. And they spent the whole time like going through it. And I'm like, perfect, that's exactly what we wanted. But I'm also finding older adults are telling me that, first of all, some of them like this version much better. Just anyway, they like comics, they like cartoons, but also for people for whom English is a second language, they're finding the graphic version much easier to read and comprehend because of the pictures than the original. And that's a market I hadn't thought about. We are hoping that this gets translated into other languages besides English, but for now, it's in English, and people whose primary language is something else are finding this to be useful. So I was very impressed. I still am very impressed at how Glynnis translated it. And that's the way I look at it. I mean, the book, in terms of languages, has been translated into, I think it's 16 languages. But Glynnis putting it into comic book form, that's a translation unto itself. So I tell people that she translated it into comic, right? So it's not like the font Comic Sans, but so this is the comic translation, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And it's the same and yet different. So even if you have the original book, having the graphic version is like a completely different way into it.
Yeah, definitely. I like some of the sort of modern slang insertions. I'm remembering this particular page where there's a scene where someone says "Get in, loser," where which is I think it's a Mean Girls reference, right? The movie. So I'm curious, Glynnis, a couple of questions on that. How did your background on archaeological digs help you come up with these new scenarios that I think you've mainly added to the existing text, right? And then what about the young adult references and using slang and kind of bringing in very modern ways to visualize and imagine something that happened so long ago? What was the process for that like? And how did you work on that together with Eric as well? Were there any disagreements or creative differences, and how did you solve them in the in the process?
That's a good question. Did we have it? I mean, I think
We
the
didn't have
big
any,
one.
no disagreements, no
Yeah,
arguments,
no,
but
there really weren't, which was remarkable.
right. I would say the only thing that we got close to, and it isn't quite that, is when we first decided to introduce the two kids, and then when we
Yeah,
decided to introduce ourselves in there. So maybe you
yeah,
can talk about that. Those are
yeah.
the only two where we had back and forths.
Yeah, and that was really helpful because I had drawn the, the the prologue and the first chapter without those characters. They weren't in it. And Eric said, "Okay, very good, but this is it's missing something, or there could be more." And so together and Eric had said, um, let's put us in it early on, and I was kind of resistant because I'd seen other comics that looked like a TED talk, and they, like there was a main character who's walking around saying this is this, like, and Sapiens is a book like that has the, like a
Mhm.
series of characters that are walking and talking, and I wanted it to be more, um, it can't be interactive, but I wanted the ancient characters to have more of a voice, and so that it would be more of an immersive into their world rather than us from really far outside telling you about it. And so these characters grew out of that idea, like
Mhm.
let's get into their world very much and have them have a stake in it, like this, the kid Pell saying, "What happened? Why isn't our life like my parents or grandparents?" Which I think, like I can relate to that, and kids now can relate to that. Our lives are different than the previous generation. Why? And so that when Eric suggested adding these characters, it really unlocked a kind of world and also made it much more personal for me. Strangely enough, these characters making it personal is funny, but that's how it worked. And I think, it added so much of playfulness for me to be able to make them, um, interact with people in the ancient world, like, um, this is allowed. Okay, I'll do it then. And I think I just was thinking of jokes as I went along, and just put them in and sent them to Eric, and no one ever said you can't, you take this out unless there are things that I've forgotten that, weren't that important. Um, and I think, it's funny. I don't know if young people will get, a reference to Mean Girls, especially, like in 5 years or 10, if this book has a longer life. But it doesn't matter because, I mean, it works in the,
Yes, it works.
anyone can
It
take it. And
works anyway. Yeah, even if they
I
don't.
didn't want it to make it so dated in time that it wouldn't work. But, um,
Yeah, but
I'm sure that,
saying something like "get in, loser" is timeless, right?
yes.
Whether or not, right? But yeah, there are jokes on almost every page, and I do think people will get it. But it's also the type of thing where frequently this is the case with cartoons and such too, where you have a parent and a kid watching, and they are both laughing, but for different reasons, and the parent is getting things at a different level than the kid is. But But I also think that this contributes to the young adults reading it because the two characters are what, like 12 or 13 years old at most. One's a boy, one's a girl. And so if we've got that range of 7 to 17-year-olds reading it, they're going to identify with the two main characters being kids their age. But the other thing that happened is that we realized after Glynnis had redone the prologue and the chapter and all that, there were certain things that the two kids back then could not have known about, such as radiocarbon dating, things like that. And so in the end, I did win out. I did persuade Glynnis to put us in, but we're in very, very mildly. We're like in the top left-hand corner. And me saying to Glynnis, the kids wouldn't have known this, but let me tell you about radiocarbon dating. And she's like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, yeah, but the kids wouldn't know. So, and then I mansplain a little bit. All right. So, so that was that. I think you had to go back and redo a couple of chapters with that too, after we figured that out. But so that was kind of the process. Yeah. We ended up with 4 new characters that aren't in the original book, but I think help tell the narrative and really immerse the reader in the story. I really do think it's interactive now with all these characters. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like a guide, like the Microsoft Word paperclip.
Right.
Right. Right.
And have you spoken to any kids or young adults that have read the book? Have you had any real-time reactions or responses?
Sounds like you have more than I have, Eric.
Yeah, I don't know about more than you have, but I have because I've been on the road lecturing about the sequel and the original. And yeah, people are coming up to me with copies of all of them, but especially just the other day, somebody came up and handed me the graphic version and said, "Will you sign it to my son?" And I'm like, okay, to so and so. And so, yeah, I'm getting the feedback. And it also, I'm seeing on Twitter/X and on Facebook and Instagram, people posting pictures of it. I think that one just posted it yesterday. So we are getting feedback. And yeah, it does look like the kids are enjoying it. But as I said, also, the adults are as well, which is totally cool.
And how would you say the reception differs in terms of the graphic adaptation to 1177 to perhaps more academic specialist publications on the same topic? And also, do you think there's potential for use in schools or higher education as well?
I can answer the latter quickly. I know they're using it in schools because I've gotten a couple of emails where the teacher, like a high school teacher, and I think in junior high at one point, they assigned it as the summer reading. So the kids would read
Very
it over
nice.
the summer, then come back and talk about it. So I know it's being read that way. Um, as for the reception by like our colleagues and other academics, I haven't heard anything officially. Unofficially, like friends have said, this is great, this is wonderful, but I don't know, what the snooty, snobby people are going to say about this. So I don't know. Maybe Glynis, have you heard anything?
They're not telling me.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think,
I think that they're like, for example, this spring at NYU, there was that day-long conference response to after 1177, and there isn't such a thing. No one's generated a conference day response to 1177, the graphic edition, but this fall, like I'll be on a panel at the Small Press Expo, which is outside of DC, and the panel's called Big Topics in Nonfiction, and it's other people who've also done nonfiction comic work. So
yeah,
there is um, there is some um, there's conversations about adaptation and other comics and nonfiction that are happening at this conference and other ones.
Yeah, and
Feedback.
we are being asked to give joint presentations at a couple of things coming up in the fall. So people are interested. It's taking longer for this to catch on, in part because people don't know where to look for it. It's really word of mouth at the moment. But
yeah, it's interesting. Like in bookstores, like I saw it in Portland, Oregon at Powell's. It was like on the top shelf in ancient history, like on the third floor. And I went downstairs and I said, "Hey guys, this could be in your YA nonfiction section right here on the main floor in front of people's faces. How about you move some copies?" And they're like, "Oh, okay." But we'll see how that works.
yeah, yeah. I think this is all kind of a new thing. I mean, Glynnis mentioned *Sapiens* by Harari, and he's got a graphic version of *Sapiens*. But there aren't that many other graphic adaptations yet of other big academic nonfiction books. I do think there are going to be more. I think this is starting a trend. I know that at Princeton University Press, they've published a book called *Heretics*, which is also graphic. So I'm hoping that we are the beginning of a wave of new things, but people are, it is hard to bring it to their attention. But like Glynnis says, when you say, "Hey, look, this belongs here," they're like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't think of that." So we just have to keep pushing on and doing the presentations and word of mouth on social media. But it is selling quite well, and I'm optimistic for the future.
Great. On that note, are there any future projects that you'd like to share? And also, do you have any advice for other academics, scholars, or illustrators who would like to do a similar translation project from, a sort of a traditional book version of an academic topic into a more accessible or sort of more varied in terms of audiences graphic novel adaptation?
I think, I mean, starting with advice first, I think that comics, the medium is very unique in the way you can tell stories using words and pictures together, and it isn't for everyone. I mean, it's shocking, but I know people who have a hard time processing both registers at the same time. But also, I think that there's a kind of danger in adaptation where you make one to one, like a statement and an image that equal each other. And I always want to try and play with that and make sure that they are interacting and one doesn't give all the information, that the image and the text don't duplicate each other. And so any advice would be to always pay attention to that, to how these two media can work together. And James Sturm, who was my editor on my book on Charlotte Bronte, has said, and I don't know if this originates with him or not, that it's not combining words and pictures, it's combining graphic design and poetry. And so I think of it's very much about the rhythm of storytelling and how you tell rather than what you tell. I mean, that's true across any medium, but how you use these things together. And I mean, as in, I know like I can look at a page and say, oh, I should have done this more or this less, but the process of playing with it is really enjoyable for me. And so that's I think what can carry any advice or future project, is enjoying that. And about if I mean I am Eric's just finished a new book. Is that okay to say already, Eric, or not?
Yes, yeah, yes. You may. Yes.
On the Amarna letters that I will draw some illustrations and maps for. And Rob hasn't yet said, oh, go ahead with after 1177. I think he's sort of waiting to see how everything plays out, which is just fine. Like it's a big and very different job, the Iron Age.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But yeah, so Glynnis is now doing more illustrations for the Amarna Letters book, which I have just finished. But I too am waiting for Rob to say, "Oh, good, the graphic adaptation of 1177 has done well enough. Let's graphically adapt after 1177." And I'm very much hoping that he'll say that because I can already see it in my mind. It's going to lend itself extremely well to a graphic adaptation. But, not every book would do so, but I think that one will. The only other thing that I would bring up is something that Glynnis may or may not want me to talk about, but the other things that she does is create brand new graphic novels based on this time period. And I know for a fact that she's working on at least one, if not two, where they're set in the time period like of the Bronze Age, but it's its own story. And that, I think, is the other way to go, where you're not doing one-to-one adapting another book. You are literally creating a new book, but the story is set in a known context. So, and those are absolutely wonderful also. And it's kind of almost the natural segue. If you like the adaptation of this book, now let's go into what is really fiction, except it's based in nonfiction.
Right. So sort of historical fiction crossover.
Yeah. Yes. Historical fiction. Yeah, in the Bronze Age. There's really not that much of it in graphic novel form because I think people don't know very much about that world.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a daunting amount of research.
Right.
Yeah, it's the only other ones I can think of are the cartoon history series, but it's always a very brief sort of insight into that time period before things move on.
Exactly. But that in a way is the grandfather of what we're doing.
Yes.
I grew up with the cartoon history by Larry Gonick, and the jokes there are really funny. I mean, especially if you know the real stuff. Like if you're an Assyriologist, you get the inside jokes that are in that book. So same thing, we've got the same sort of thing. But yeah, I would have said that was really the only thing before us that was trying to do the same sort of thing.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I mean, Glynnis, I like your anecdote at the bookstore where there's a sort of a confusion about where to place the book and maybe an obvious solution, but it's not clear from the onset. So it almost seems like there's pioneering work to be done in terms of marketing and publicizing this sort of work. So was there a particular strategy that was adopted by the publisher or beyond word of mouth and social media, or is that something that's continuing to develop as this genre sort of evolves as we speak?
I think that's a good way to put it because I think after it was published, I asked them to add the YA category, which means that it would be shelved among YA books in bookstores and libraries. And I wonder if because it was added after it was published, that people wouldn't consider it that, like I was amazed. I mean, Powell's is a huge bookstore, but they had two whole shelves of YA nonfiction, and a lot of them are comics. And so I do think it's still evolving, and in different bookstores or will have different ways of dealing with that depending on their size and resources. Yes, I think that's an ongoing conversation. And I also think that the biggest or the audiences for this will come out of academic world where people are already studying this because in the comics, coming from comics direction, people are like, what is that? There's no context for what that time period is. People might have an idea, people who are educated but not in detail, they know classical Greece, but the Bronze Age is a whole other thing that might not even register.
Right.
So
right.
It does seem like audiences for events that have been most attended have been in an academic setting. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I'm finding two things. One is when we give a lecture on this and have copies of the book to sell and sign, people are like, "Oh my God, I didn't even think about that. I was going to get the original for myself, but now I'm also going to get the graphic version for my kid or my grandkid." So, but it's after we've put pictures up on the screen and people can see it and they hold it in their hands. And, yes, it's a comic book per se, but have you ever seen another comic book that's 250 pages? This thing it's huge, it's thick. So there's that. But the other thing that I'm finding, and this is kind of riffing off the opposite of what Glynnis is saying, yes, that the cartoon conventions and all that, people are like, wait, what's the Bronze Age? But it goes the other way, where the academics who do the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and they're Mycenaeologist or Assyriologist or Egyptologist, and they're like, I'm going to buy this for my kid or my grandkids so they understand what I do. And it's a way in for the family to understand what the professional in their family does. And I've had people say, finally, my family understands what I do and why I'm so interested in it. So, but, obviously that's a limited audience, but hey, you got to start somewhere and then it spreads from there. So, yeah, I do think, and I've talked to Glynnis about this, I think this would make a wonderful animated series on TV. I also think it would make an absolutely wonderful Saturday morning cartoon for kids. Edit out the more, death and destruction bits and
Oh no,
just
they
having.
love that.
Do they? Okay. All right. Well, anyway, I think it'd make a great Saturday. I'd watch the Saturday morning cartoon. All right. But also,
Great idea.
yeah, something like Fox at night. I know there's a show called Crapopolis on right now, which is about the ancient world, and I'm watching it going, this could be ours. Anyway, I do think that's a whole nother market, but I don't even know how we break into that, calling Hollywood. Hello.
You've heard it here first, the animated series of 1177.
There we go.
Oh, one final question. Was there something new that you learned in terms of researching the period as you were adapting the book into a graphic novel? Was the process of translating the words into imagery and into the graphic novel format something that actually brought new information or understanding of the time period?
That's really good. I think for me, drawing those scenes of kind of reenacting, or it's I don't know if I could call this like new, but being more sympathetic to the lives of these people who whatever if it's a big climate change or see peoples who were pushed out of where they were living through no fault of their own. I think it brings a kind of sympathy to other people who are in the world, who are swept through in events, big events in history that they are kind of innocent of, like they did nothing and their lives are overturned by something far out of their control. It's happening all the time right now and as then. So I think that's what it's brought me, is the chance to draw people who are suffering in different ways. So that doesn't sound very cheerful, but it adds a sense of connection to the past for me that that generates ideas or I don't know, a connection to people across time and place, because knowing that it's happening now also. I guess it's like a depth of human story through the details of what we know about the past. You know, something like imagining people bringing cumin or coriander to a new shore along with the pigs, like how I use the word mind blowing in that, and that has to be, but also who are these people? They're strangers on our shore, and conflict would probably result. So a small detail can evoke a world. I guess that's what I mean.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, the new that I understood was how to even better bring the ancient past to a modern audience of general readers that are not specialists, but that are interested in the ancient world. And, you know, it's one thing to try and write for a general audience as opposed to a specialist audience. You know, it's a very different way of going about it. But this was yet again a very different way of going about it. And I could see as Glynnis was drawing and going through the various drafts, how even what I had written that I had thought was a good way to get across to a journal audience, a concept, I realized that there was even a better way to phrase it. And not necessarily just through the images, but even through Glynnis paring away the excess 80% to get to the 20% that was the nitty gritty, and then reformulating it, rephrasing it to get it across to the audience. In terms of not only making it understandable, but as she said, to make it relatable so that the ancient world and the modern world are kind of in tandem, and to put it in terms that a modern general audience can appreciate. And that was that was my big takeaway, was new thoughts as to how to bring what we love to a larger audience and make it not only understandable, but interesting.
And fun.
Yeah, and fun, and fun, and funny too, and funny. I can Glynis's sense of humor is the same as mine. Let's put it that way. Both kind of sort of wacky, but if you get it, you get it. I mean, there are I don't know, would you call them dad jokes on every page? They're definitely jokes. Some dad, some not dad, but there are, if you go through and read it, you will be laughing on every page. And I think that's in part what I like so much about it, but also what a stuffy, snobby academic might not like about it, because I think we're not taking ourselves that seriously, right? We're not poking fun at ourselves, but we're having fun with it. And I think that's in part what makes it enjoyable. And I do hope most people will agree with that.
There's also, I mean, I think that the scene of um, like what was the end of the Bronze Age like, and I drew the scene of women hanging up laundry, saying the and it's how's collapse going for you? It's so boring. It just keeps going. I mean, like I really wanted to imagine not just the like the historical Ramses inscription, but also what would be happening alongside of that. Like the boring daily life has to go on. You still have to do laundry, as you discuss how that they haven't had any letters from Hattusha, as if women doing laundry would be sending letters to Hattusha. But I wanted to be able to bring the sort of sweeping events to the using the drinking cup that you could be finding fragments of in a site, and that's the connection between these physical properties of daily life with the larger events in history is what really interests me. And I guess I constantly think of how do I fit into that, and what would my life have been like in this event, and that's what keeps me really interested. And there's something about the style of the late Bronze Age art and that is just fascinating.
Sounds like you can really connect and relate. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Eric and Glynnis, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really fascinating insight into the process of working on this project, but also the way you connect with the topic. And and it's also been very exciting for me to hear about your ideas for future projects and things like that. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank
great.
you for asking such good questions. Really.
Yes, and thank you for having us on. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll keep you posted as to future endeavors if there are any.
Wonderful. We'll look forward to it.
Thanks.
Thank you.